Good morning, everybody. It is my great pleasure to introduce today Mehdy Shaddel, who is a Leverhulme Fellow at the University of Cambridge. He obtained his PhD in Religious Studies in 2024 from Leiden University with a thesis entitled Apocalypse, Empire, and Universal Mission at the End of Antiquity, World Religions at the Crossroads. Before arriving to Cambridge, he was a research fellow in projects in the Aga Khan University, but also in Leiden and in Trier. Moreover, he already obtained a FRS, FNRS Fond Chargé de Recherche position at the University of Liège, which he will take up after the end of his Cambridge position. His research addresses mainly Near Eastern history, with a particular focus on Islamic origins and the socioeconomic, political, and religious history of the early Muslim empire. But also, he works on Christian-Muslim, Jewish relations, apocalypticism, and messianism. Among his several publications, I would like to mention only his 2026 paper, Power, Memory, and the Sacred, Early Abbasid Monumental Inscriptions and the Patronage of the Meccan Sanctuary, and his 2021 paper, Monetary Reform under the Sufyanids, the Papyrological Evidence. He's now currently working on two book projects, one on the rise of the Umayyads and the second on the fiscal regime and social transformation in the early caliphate. Today, May will present a paper entitled Umar a Second as a Reformer, the Social and Fiscal Backdrop of His Edicts, the Fiscal Rescripts and Risāla fi al-fayʼ. May, the floor is all yours.
Okay, thank you very much. And thank you, Georgia, for this very kind introduction. Thank you, organizers, for organizing the seminar, for inviting me here. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much. So let me share my slides first. Can I share my slides? Okay, let me see where the slides here. No, I can't see my own slides. Please give me a second. It's here, but when I press the share button, oh yes. Yes. Can you see it now? Okay, good. So, as mentioned, we are going to actually talk about two edicts, mostly one actually. We are mostly going to talk about the Fiscal Rescript of Umar II, a very famous edict issued by the caliph Umar II. But we are going to briefly mention another edict newly discovered and published by Sean Anthony called al-Risāla fil-fayʼ, or the Epistle on Conquest Revenues, and this talk as well. But because they are, I think, related. So why? That's going what I'm going to actually, discuss in this presentation, this talk today. But the focus will mainly remain the fiscal rescript, and in the interest of time, and then we'll only briefly mention the Risāla fil-fayʼ. But of course, I'm happy to address any questions about the Risāla fil-fayʼ and the Q&A as well. So the fiscal rescript was first actually, academic attention was first actually drawn to the fiscal rescript in a 1955 article by Sir Hamilton Gibb called The Fiscal Rescript of Umar II. So, but in the article, Gibb actually did not discuss the nature of the text or anything other than giving a translation. So the article is basically a one-page introduction, just saying that this is the Fiscal Rescript and this is where it comes from, and the rest is a translation of the Fiscal Rescript. So where it actually comes from as a biography of Umar II by the Egyptian actually historian Ibn Abd al-Ḥakam. So it's contained within the biography of Umar II, and this is said to be a letter he sent to his governors, basically an edict. But what this edict is exactly about? It's obviously called the Fiscal Rescript by Gibb, and everyone else actually kept calling it the Fiscal Rescript after Gibb, but the main issue is that we don't have a clear actually discussion in the secondary literature by modern scholars of what the script is actually trying to achieve. Some of them are fiscal issues, but some of them, as we shall see presently, are supposedly about other things. And there is generally a conflict in actually basically disagreements in secondary literature about what basically Umar II tried to achieve. Was it about things Islamic? Because Umar II has got this reputation as being a very pious caliph, something of a saint, or was it fiscal issues? So this is what I'm going to actually discuss in the present talk today. And this is actually the other edict, published in an excellent article, edited and translated by Sean Anthony, a discovered letter of Umayyad Caliph Umar ibn Abd al-Aziz, the Risāla al-fayʼ, and then to the other, the other problem with the fiscal rescript when discussing the fiscal rescript in the secondary literature is that their appreciations of the reign of Umar II are rather sometimes contradictory, because as we just mentioned, some of his reforms are said to be about religion, some of them about economy, and they're contradictory. Some of these actually things that is allegedly said. And then the other aspect of the difficulties with making an assessment of Umar's reforms has got to do with a proper understanding of the fiscal rescript. So this is a translation is given by Gibb. And the first part is the introductory part of the edict. As you can see, the introductory part of the edict brings up God and religion and Islam and everything. But what is not quite clear here is what all of this has got to do with the rest of the edict. Is this just because this caliph is a Muslim, he has to mention God and Islam and everything? Or is there a connection actually between what he says here and what comes after in the edict? First, and second, usually the answer is in the affirmative by scholars, that is all about Islam. Umar II actually remove taxes from converts to Islam and everything, but you don't get any of that in the fiscal script. So you don't have any references to anyone being actually, any taxes being, any legitimate taxes being removed from anyone. So double tax, the only thing that is actually, as we shall see presently, the only thing that is banned in the fiscal rescript is double taxation. Other than that, there's nothing actually we can't find anything of the sort in the fiscal rescript. So what is it about then? Is it about religion really? And if it's not, if it's about the economy, why religion is being mentioned here? What is the relationship between the two? This is not actually properly appreciated in secondary literature. And then you see that, for example, the institution of Hijrah, both in the preamble and in what is actually designated as clause 4 by Gibb, you have the word emigration, al-Hijrah in Arabic, actually mentioned in the script and translated as emigration by Gibb. This is, I think, important, and I think this does not just have to do with Islam. It's about both actually the economy and the social problems that actually are always associated with the economy. So as in any other society, and is in our modern societies, there are always social problems associated with the economy. For example, we always have the issue of immigrants. It's got nothing to do with the hijrah. We'll get back to what the hijrah means later on. But for example, we bring up social issues in the context of the economy. In many countries, when the economy starts to falter, you have, for example, people actually disagreeing with immigration and wanting less immigration and so on and so forth, or other, for example, other things that have to do with the economy, not directly but indirectly. For example, by trying to downsize the welfare state and so on and so forth. So there's always a social dimension to the economy, and this is my contention here, that there's a social dimension to the problem, social-religious dimension to the problems that we have here, the economic problems that we have here in the early Islamic Empire, and that the Fiscal Rescript by Umar II is an attempt, as well as the other actually edict, the Risāla al-fayʼ, as an attempt by Umar II to address these issues. And in order to get there, I am going to actually offer a reassessment of the nature of the fiscal system in the early Islamic Empire and the problems attendant upon that fiscal system to contextualize and understand the fiscal rescript, and in the process also authenticate it. So this is something that we can actually discuss further in the Q&A, because there's other evidence in favor of the authenticity of the rescript as well. But this is my main contention, that the fiscal system, as we see reflected in the fiscal rescript, only obtained until the end of the Umayyad period. So the fiscal rescript only makes sense in Umayyad context. It could not have been forged after the end of the Umayyad period. So even if it does not go back to Umar II himself, it at least goes back to a mid-Umayyad period high-ranking government official. So, I mean, I'm not going to say that this 100% actually goes back to Umar II, but what I'm going to say is that it does go to at least a high-ranking Umayyad era official, mid-Umayyad era official. So this is going to be my case. So, and we discussed this already, that Umar II actually is considered a very pious caliph, something of a saintly figure in Islamic tradition, and that assessments of his reign have usually emphasized religion at the expense of the economy. So no one actually tries to make an assessment of the reign of Umar II and his policies from an economic standpoint. So the economy is only discussed insofar as it concerns religion. For example, by saying that Umar II actually removed the jizya tax, the poll tax, from converts to Islam. And there are contradictions actually, other contradictions actually in sometimes unwitting contradictions in what secondary literature attributes to Umar II. For example, because we don't see any of this in the Fiscal Rescript, while the Fiscal Rescript is supposed to be the one authentic document going back to Umar II that we have. So the problem, I think, ultimately arises from the fact that, well, I mean, the problem with this understanding of not only the reign of Umar II, but generally our entire conception of the nature of the fiscal system in early Islam, I think, arises from some institutional and ideological problems. We need to actually understand this, because before going forward, because what I'm going to do actually in the next half an hour or so is a radical revision of the nature of the fiscal system in early Islam. And because of this, I need to justify this. Why everyone else, I think, has got it wrong and I've got it wrong. Right? Am I going crazy or am I up to something? Why is that? Well, I think the reason for this, for the fact that we have misunderstood actually the fiscal system is institutional. Why is that? Because as will become presently clear in my conception of the nature of the fiscal system in early Islam, religion plays only a small role. It's not really that small, but much smaller than what other scholars actually ascribe to it. And I think the reason that so much emphasis is placed on religion is partly institutional, in so far as most scholars of basically Islamic history or Middle Eastern studies have, since the inception of the field, been confined to departments of Oriental studies, and later on, I mean, nowadays we don't use the term Oriental studies, but we are basically departments of Oriental studies. My actually own department was called Oriental Studies until the early 2000s or something like that, I believe, and now it's called Asian and Middle Eastern studies. In some other universities, you have Islamic and Middle Eastern studies, Middle Eastern studies, Arabic studies, Islamic studies. But at the end of the day, it's Orientalist studies. It's all Orientalist studies with a different name. Why? What's what makes it so different from other fields? Because we are not actually we are not in a history department. In a history department, when you go to a history department to study in a history department, you're sitting with other people who are also interested in history. You learn the methods of doing history from historians. But when you go to an area studies department, so I have this problem with my own students actually at Cambridge, even at Cambridge. So the problem is that when we start teaching, they have no clue what's going on. We give them sources to actually write commentaries on, and they ask me what is the point of what is the commentary supposed to accomplish? And I have to give them actually this first, that look, I am a historian, and this is a historical actually course. So the idea is to train you as historians. This is and this comes as something of a surprise to them. We are not in a history department because most other courses they take is as with people who do Arabic literature, who do sociology of the modern Middle East, anthropology of the modern Middle East, even let's say, for example, political economy of the modern Middle East, and so on and so forth. So we are a hodgepodge of people with different specialities lumped together in departments of Orientalist studies, or whatever name that we have actually changed Orientalist studies to these days. So this means that we don't have that kind of basically robust methodological training that is required of historians. And then the other problem is that these being the departments of Arabic and Islamic studies and the focus being on Islam, we usually like train our students, or at least historically, until very recently, fairly recently, we have only trained our students in quote unquote Islamic languages. Which is like basically Arabic and to some extent Persian and Turkish. So insofar as, of course, early Islamic history is concerned, Turkish is completely irrelevant and Persian not that much. So if you want to actually study early Islamic history, you need to be well versed in other languages such as Greek and and Syriac, of course, and to some extent maybe Coptic and other languages, as well as to be able to consult material evidence, papyri, coins, inscriptions, and so on and so forth. But this training has been by and large absent. So basically the field has only begun to undergo a paradigm shift in terms of the way it deals with the evidence and with the sources. So with this long apologia, I would like to actually continue and offer something of a reconstruction of the nature of the fiscal system in early Islam. But before that, I would like to contend that both of the two edicts issued by Umar II have almost entirely, save for one or two actually throw-ins, they have by and large they deal with economic issues. So, for example, this clause, if you look at this clause deals with the practice of introducing himas. Hima are protected basically grazing grounds, mostly in Arabia. They were protected actually grazing grounds that were reserved for the government, for use by the government, and any, the basically beasts pasturing in these grazing grounds were either owned by the government because they were collected as taxes from, taxes in kind from nomadic tribes, or because they were actually used by the government for grazing, to be used actually for as grazing ground by horses and camels that belonged basically to the government or the army. And in Arabian context, as you can imagine, because of the dry climate, grazing grounds are rare to come by. So exclusively allocating a grazing ground to the government and forbidding other people from using it causes conflict and disaffection. So this is one of the points that's raised in the fiscal rescript, for example. Recently, Harry Munt actually, in a presentation here at Cambridge, actually made the same argument that this actually abolition of the Hema in this clause in the edict by Umar II actually means that there was some conflict in a dry Arabian context over the use of these grazing grounds, and because of the conflict and the ensuing disaffection, it was because of the conflict and ensuing disaffection that Umar II decided to actually abolish the practice of actually keeping Hamas in Arabia. So here, Harriman and I agree actually in this issue. And then if you look at other clauses actually in the edict, so the one quote this actually the different quotations on the left are from the Fiscal Rescript, and the one from the right is from the Risāla the Epistle on Conquest Revenues, which is newly discovered actually. And if you look at the left, so the first clause on the top, it's actually an abolition. The translation by Gibb doesn't actually make this quite clear, crystal clear, but this is an abolition of the practice of issuing land grants. So the government would issue land grants to actually people, and these land grants came in the form of sometimes dead land. So like land that is not irrigated, that's not cultivated. So the government would actually give out this dead land, this uncultivated land, unirrigated land to individuals to irrigate, but they wouldn't have to pay for anything. And usually these would come with tax concessions. So you wouldn't have to pay any taxes on this. So these were mostly given to people with good context in the government. So high-ranking officials, courtiers, and so on and so forth, they would actually receive a grant from the government to cultivate the land, dead land, uncultivated land, without having it to pay any taxes after its cultivation on it. And in this way, actually, they would actually make a lot of money. So Umar II actually says that this is a bad idea because these people actually cultivate the land, benefit from it, and everything without paying any taxes on it. This hurts the tax base. So we shouldn't do this. The second clause is about refugees, people who have left their district and are now in a different district, and then because of this, they are being doubly taxed, or not necessarily fed, but generally, like I mean, are have left their district and are now in a different district, and they're being doubly taxed both in their own old district, their place of origin, and their new district. So Omar II is basically saying that like this is a bad idea. We shouldn't be doubly taxing people. Only tax people in their place of origin. So this is, I mean, it's not entirely like I mean this clause is not entirely about I mean there is some concern actually you can see some concern for the taxpayer, for the population, for the ruled actually in this clause, but that's not just it. So the ultimate aim is to abolish practices that hurt the tax base in the end, because eventually if you doubly tax people, they're gonna eventually go bankrupt and won't be able to keep paying taxes, and then in the longer term this might actually give rise to disaffection that would actually contribute tax revolts and then feed into tax revolts and other actually kinds of activities. And then in the next clause we have the abolition of corvée labor, which is unpaid, of course, because it's corvée. And this is also considered actually a bad practice, something that hurts actually the taxpayers and the population of the empire, basically at large. And and then in the final clause on the left, we have the abolition of the tithe tax for everyone but foreign merchants. So foreign merchants are the only ones who would have to pay the tithe tax. And people of the empire, it says that, well, they're already paying taxes. They're already paying taxes one way or another. Those who are like craftsmen are paying actually their taxes through the income they earn, landowners through their land, and so on and so forth. So there's no reason to institute another actually tax category called tithe and impose it on these people. So the only people who need to be imposed, I mean, who need to be charged this tithe are farm merchants who otherwise won't be any paying any taxes in the empire because they're foreigners. They're based abroad. And on the right, in the Risāla al-fayʼ, and again, in the interest of time, I'm not going to actually offer a clinical actually dissection of the Risāla al-fayʼ, but there are actually you can actually see terminology that fits in nicely with some of the things that we see in the fiscal rescripts. So, for example, emphasis on the notion of TeTra and the stipends and conquest revenues and everything, fayʼ and so on and so forth. So my argument is that these two edicts are very intrinsically intertwined, connected with each other, and they were issued together as part of the same package of reforms. So we're going to get to that presently. And in terms of the fiscal system itself, the backdrop to the fiscal system, I mean, we discussed this, that the fiscal system has been, the nature of the fiscal system has been misunderstood for different reasons, and that scholarship actually since the beginning of the 20th century on this subject has mostly focused on on the one hand focused on the Abbasid revolution and the causes of the Abbasid revolution. They have actually put a lot of emphasis, huge emphasis, on the role of conversion to Islam in the Abbasid revolution and the grievances of the converts to Islam that fed into the Abbasid revolution on the one hand. And then on the other, we have a completely different strand of scholarship on mostly of a papyrological nature by papyrologists on the taxation regime. And these two actually different strands of scholarship are completely divorced from each other and are not usually studied together. So are not usually, don't basically interact with each other. So you have one strand of the scholarship on the Abbasid revolution that doesn't say anything about papyrology and tax, or in its discussion of the taxation regime does not use papyrology. And another strand of scholarship on the taxation regime that does not actually discuss the Abbasid revolution, does use papyrology, but does not discuss the Abbasid revolution. And the problem is that eventually, when you want to, first and foremost, first things first, my contention is that in addition to the taxation system, we also need to actually study government expenditure. It's very important to study government expenditure alongside the taxation system. Why? Because these are the two sides of the same coin. So in addition to the Abbasid revolution and the taxation system, I think any discussion of any of these, conversion to Islam in the Umayyad period, insofar as it concerns political, basically, political disquiet, and on the one hand, and on the other hand, the Abbasid revolution and taxation regime, this cannot be divorced from any discussion of government pay, because these are the two sides of the same economic coin, the same fiscal coin. So in order to get that, we need to get there, we need to study government expenditure too, because government expenditure is supposedly connected with Islam too. And then who got actually paid by the government, why, whatever for, basically what the terms of membership in the conquest society and the society that basically in the empire that the Arabs put together, that the conquerors put together after the conquests were, and that how this actually led to upheaval under the Umayyads, and then what attempts did the Umayyads actually make to reform the system. This is actually very important for us because I think Umar II actually in his Fiscal Rescript and the Risāla al-fayʼ actually is attempting to reform the system in response to the social disquiets caused by these actually by the system. And then, of course, like eventually this fails. Of course, this is what we are going to briefly discuss. The reforms fail eventually after the death of Umar II. The reforms are reversed, And eventually, this actually culminates in the Abbasid revolution and downfall of the Umayyads. So this is basically, I mean, a précis of my argument. But insofar as the fiscal system is itself is concerned, so taxation regime after the conquest. So of course, and especially this is very actually a commonplace in scholarship on Eastern Christianity. That whenever, and this is another problem, by the way, I'm going to actually elaborate on this in a moment that whenever actually the taxation system in early Islam is discussed, people tend to actually argue that the taxation system involved the taxation of non-Muslims by Muslims, and it was basically arranged alongside religious lines. So it's about Muslims taxing non-Muslims. But the problem is that that's the problem. That's where government pay actually comes into play. So this actually the money that is thus raised is supposed to go towards the payment of stipends to the conquerors. But that stipend, of course, is not only paid to Muslims but also non-Muslims. So there is some overlap here. So well, if we conceive of this as the system as something that is arranged alongside religious lines, we'll end up with categories that are overlapping and cannot actually overlap. So you can't be actually both part of the conquered class and the conquering class. You need to be, there's a strict division between these two. And you can't be just being like, I'm part of the ruled, I'm part of the rulers. So in order to get there, I think we need to actually start thinking that maybe both sides, I'm neither side of the basically fiscal system, nor the demand side, meaning government pay, neither the demand side nor the supply side, meaning taxation, has got anything to do with religion. And this is in fact the argument that Karl Heinrich Becker and Sir Hardus Bell made at the beginning of the 20th century. So they published a corpus of administrative documents found in Egypt from the middle of the Umayyad period. And based on their study of this corpus, they concluded that the taxation system actually had nothing to do with religion because, I mean, I've produced an example, a photo of one of these actually documents on the right. As you can see, this is a tax demand note and it's addressed to individual districts. It doesn't actually differentiate, but between the taxpayers in terms of their religion or anything of the sort. It's just a generic tax demand note. And it seems that the central government in Fustat in Egypt actually just sent demanded lump sums from community leaders and local community leaders, mostly Christians. They broke down actually these sums over the heads and lands of individual like members of the community and landowners. So the government did not concern itself with how, like the Islamic government, the Islamic state did not concern itself with how these taxes were raised. They were only concerned with raising revenues, and the raising of the revenues was left to local authorities. So it had nothing to do with the individuals, actually. It did not, let alone discriminate on the basis of religion. And and but the problem is that in the literary sources we have references to basically converts to Islam still being charged taxes while they expected not to be taxes and everything, not to pay taxes and everything because they had converted to Islam and they were opposed to the Umayyads because of this. So this was the explanation given for the Abbasid revolution, basically political disquiet under the Umayyads and the Abbasid revolution. And because most scholars who actually wrote on this topic could not account for this disquiet in other ways, they thought that, okay, so we have to disregard the papyrological evidence. Bell and Becker were mistaken and just focus on literary sources and keep claiming that the fiscal system was arranged along religious lines. but I'm going to offer actually a different explanation that will take account of this disquiet in ways that have not that don't have to do with religion in the way they thought. So this is basically I mean, what we get not only from the papyrological actually evidence, but also from literary sources, from legal sources, and so on and so forth. Only that the majority of the legal sources imposed their own view of this. This is their classical view of how things were supposed to work in the first and second Islamic centuries on the actual events of these centuries. This is the mainstream view of these sources, these legal sources. But with a caveat, no one has noticed this, but there are two actually legal manuals, and these are the earliest ever Arabic legal manuals on taxation and fiscal issues. They both dedicate a section, basically not two, but yeah, two of the three earliest, excuse me, two of the three earliest manuals on this topic dedicate a section which discusses an alternative view. And that alternative view actually brings up the issue of the hijrah. And we're going to get there presently. They don't discuss Islam. They say that, well, there are two different views. One of them actually says that basically paying the government, paying people has got to do with Islam versus Christianity and or generally other religions, and that Muslims need to be paid by the government, pay the stipends by the government. Non-Muslims can't be paid, while others say that it's not about Islam, but it's about hijrah. So they actually present these two alternatives as two different views actually. And we also have like again, the majority of chronicles and other sources also say the same, that this is about Islam and everything, but then there are incidental references that in the same sources that indicate that this is about something else, about hijrah, not about Islam. So it seems that based on all of this evidence, it seems it would stand to reason that, well, early on, maybe this was not how the fiscal system was arranged, and things actually changed at a certain point in time. And these classical authors, because they agreed with this actually later view that later became classical Islam, that's why they mostly actually quote this particular view. And when we look at the demand side, on meaning government pay, the same is also like, I mean, we also see the same actually in the literature. So we have these references to actually, I mean, there's an institution set up, there's government actually, the government records set up called the Diwan and everything. And then the Diwan's actually facilitates the payment of the stipends to people and rations and so on and so forth. But according, like, I mean, to classical texts, actually, this was also, I mean, the classical view, basically. According to the classical view, this was about payment of Muslims. But then again, if you look at the papyrological record, I mean, roots from Hijrah are used, Margarita in Greek and so on and so forth, which comes from Arabic muhajir, and muhajir is actually someone who makes the Hijrah in Arabic. So it's about, again, the Hijrah. And again, we have incidental references and literary sources. And so it's not actually about Islam again, though modern and it's about basically hijrah. Though in modern scholarship we have another category added to it. They say that the D1 was for the payment of the Arabs. This is not even in classical Islamic literature, not even these like later literature. So this is just a figment of modern scholars' imagination. There is no mention of the Arabs actually anywhere in the sources. It's either about Muslims or the Muhajirun, those who make the Hijrah. And here I have produced some of the examples of these incidental references to the notion of Hijrah, the institution of Hijrah, and the literary sources that from later periods, but these are incidental references, and because they are incidental references, because they actually come up in the context of another discussion, I think they're more reliable than normative actually stipulations in this classical literature. That's why you put more emphasis on incidental references at the expense of normative statements by the sources. By the way, how much time do I have? I think about 7 minutes. How
Yeah,
much?
a bit less, but yeah. What
I
if you
think we
need
also
seven?
started a little bit
If
late.
you need seven, take seven. It's fine. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thanks very much. So, I'm going to, in the interest of time, I'm going to omit the discussion of the exact organization of the D1, but we have the margarine here. So this is the institution of Hijra is very important, and that is why Hijra is actually mentioned in the fiscal rescript of Umar II. So what happens here? What happens here? You have Muhajirun. I mean, Muhajirun. What is it? Well, we have to discuss this in the end now. I have mentioned Hijra several times without telling you what it even means, but I've only told you that, the only thing I've told you is that Gibb actually translates Hijra as this is a mystery, I mean, so far. Gibb only translates as immigration or emigration, which is the classical actually sense of the term. But look, I mean, now after years, decades of work, it seems that based on actually contextual readings of the use of the term and in early Arabic literature and in ancient Arabian languages, the root actually doesn't mean to immigrate or to migrate, but rather to settle, to sedentize, as against leading a nomadic lifestyle. So hijra means to settle. What is hijra about? This is actually something that is mentioned in the Quran, and it's very important for Muhammad. Muhammad has got this conflict with nomads. He finds it difficult to control the nomads, so he valorizes the notion of hijra. It's like sedentization is very important. It's a pious act. If you want to be considered good Muslims, you need to sedentize, you nomads. And that's where it comes from. But after the conquests, the same notion is recycled to actually refer to people who actually settle, not just, I mean, not in the sense of settling, adopting a settled lifestyle, but rather in the sense of moving to garrison towns and the conquered territories and the garrison towns that were established to control these conquered territories and settled there. And I think this is how the term actually undergoes a semantic shift and acquires the meaning of migration because it's now about movement. But the meaning doesn't matter here. Because they do this, the conquerors do this. They move to these newly established garrison towns. They keep calling themselves Muhajirun, people who have undertaken this act. And anyone who has actually undertaken this act as a member of the Conquest Society is to be paid a stipend to benefit from the revenues of the conquests and so on and so forth. And that's why this is important for them. And anyone who actually wants to to basically enroll in the ranks of the conquerors needs to make this hijrah, needs to undertake this hijrah too. So it is hijrah that is very important, not Islam. But of course, because Islam is the official religion of the empire and the religion of the majority of the conquerors, the absolute majority of the conquerors, all the caliphs, all the high government officials, and so on, with increasingly with increased conversion to Islam, a large number of the conquerors actually large number of the converts demand to be enrolled into the ranks of the conquerors and join the conquest society because they shared this ideology, this religion, Islam, with them, with the conquerors. Meaning that, in my conception, it's not, I mean, it's the opposite. The fiscal system had nothing to do with religion initially. It was actually, that it was this demand on the part of the converts that they needed to basically be included in the system because they had converted. It wasn't like Islamic law, classical Islamic law as we know it today existed from day zero, and then the Umayyads failed to actually follow Islamic law for practical purposes, and then these people were upset. The converts were upset because the Umayyads were not actually observing Islamic law. But the other way around, that this actually notion did not exist. Classical Islamic law did not exist from day zero. People converted and people started making these demands, and as a result, as a result of the Umayyads actually failing to accommodate them, they kept actually being acting being they became disaffected with the system and with the Umayyads, and and eventually joined rebel movements. So beginning with the famous rebellion of the rebel Ibn al-Ash'ath, and at the beginning of the 8th century. So there is some evidence, we can discuss the evidence in the Q&A, that during this rebellion, actually lots of converts joined the rebellion, and this caused a problem. After the rebellion was defeated, the rebellion nearly overthrew the Umayyads, but the rebellion was eventually defeated. And after their defeat, these converts were actually deported back to their places of origin. Yet, there is an interesting actually account, and this has been actually gone unnoticed so far, but it's very important in my view. It says that Umar II's predecessor, Sulaiman, after the death of the chief architect of this system, al-Hajjaj, the governor of Iraq. So al-Hajjaj dies shortly before Sulaiman takes over as caliph. And when Sulaiman takes over, al-Hajjaj is also dead. So Sulaiman actually appoints a new governor for Iraq and orders this governor to reverse part of al-Hajjaj's policies. What is that policy that is being reversed? That's the deportation of the converts. So apparently, by this time, there's enough agitation on the part of the converts, and they've taken part in a very dangerous rebellion, that the central government is very concerned about these developments. But this is a one-off solution, of course. This only a one-time solution, only works once, because you're only allowing a set group of converts actually to make this move. Future converts, future generations won't be able to actually benefit from this actually law. So we need, of course, the government needed more concrete reforms, more meaningful reforms. And I think this is the reason, actually, that Umar II is even nominated as caliph, because, Suleiman succeeded his brother, and Umar II was succeeded by Suleiman's brothers. So it's just like brothers succeeding each other, and Umar II is a cousin. So his accession, actually, his nomination by Suleiman and accession to the caliphate is supposed to be a strange, actually, event. But they were very close. Suleiman and Umar were very close. And I think in terms of their mentality, they both also realized that the reform was needed. That's why Umar II was nominated. That's why he actually adopted this package of reform in the form of the edict, actually. These two edicts, meaning the Fiscal Rescript and the Risāla al-fayʼ. And I think that's also why he eventually gained a reputation for being a saintly figure, because the system that he advocated for accorded with the classical Islamic notion of how the fiscal system needs to be arranged. But eventually, I'm going to cut the rest of this short and just tell you that eventually, these reforms were reversed after the death of Umar II, and eventually this political discontent continued until the end of the Umayyad period, resulted in the Abbasid revolution. The Abbasids then overthrew the Umayyads and had to basically reform the system at into what we now call classical Islamic fiscal law. So classical Islamic fiscal law came around with the Abbasids. And this is how it came about. And that's where we first actually get the actually the arrangement of the system according to religion, meaning on the one hand taxation for non-Muslims, and on the other hand payment of stipends to Muslims, though only in theory. Even under the Abbasids, in practice, the fiscal system didn't have anything to do with religion. They introduced nominal categories, nominally Islamized the system. In effect, it remained an economically intelligent system. Let's put it that way. Sorry for the long-winded actually discussion, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thanks so much for an extremely informative paper and a lot of material presented. We have time for a question or two. Feel free to jump in. I have a quick one. I'm curious, what is one of the implications of your presentation, the notion that tax favor or tax easiness is not a drive. So taxation in general is not a drive behind conversion, but a drive behind something else, the settling thingy. Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly. So I don't think actually that basically taxation, economic means have anything to do with conversion to Islam. Of course, there is an economic incentive in the sense that so this is actually basically what you have. I mean, is an Islamic empire, and having actually converted to Islam helps you with upward mobility and so on and so forth. But it's not as simple as that you convert to Islam, you get exempted from taxes. It's not as simple as that. It's more complicated. You've got to convert to Islam. You've got to actually have all the right context in the government, people to actually vouch for you, and so on and so forth, so that you can actually find a position in the government, become part of the conquering classes, get enrolled in the D1 and everything, and then you get what you want eventually. So it's more complicated than that.
By the way, far more complex trajectory.
Exactly. Because things are, I mean, the reality is always more complex than our simplifications. And I think but this is too much simplification for at least me. So I would like to actually try and find out, and it doesn't make actually good sense of the evidence. So what's going on? Why do we have all these references to hijrah and payments? Why do we have, we couldn't actually understand for almost 100 years or 80 years, we couldn't understand basically the meaning of the Fiscal Rescript. What's this actually long rant at the beginning of the Fiscal Rescript about hijrah and everything? What does hijrah have to do with anything? And even in the Risāla al-fayʼ, Ibn Umar II does say this, that look, stipends are for everyone, even the early caliphs, Umar and so on, and everyone who, when they established the fiscal system, they paid the stipends to even non-Muslims. He says this. So how do we make sense of this? This is the saintly figure, the Caliph Umar II, who is supposed to be a saint, a paragon of Islam, and even he says that look, non-Muslims can receive a stipend. So there's something else going on here. There is something else going on here. And I'm trying to understand
that way.
Yeah, but and I'm sorry, you mentioned that a lot of material. I actually crammed the second book that George mentioned in the introduction into 45 minutes of a talk.
Perfect. Thank you. I think Georgia has the next question.
Yeah, thank you. It's more of you hinted at part of the answer already, especially during the second part of your talk, but it's a question that popped up to my mind when you started talking about the abolition of the Hima. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about sources that we might have, or maybe not, on the reactions to these policies. Do we have anything explicit about how these new changes were received? For instance, the abolition of the
I
Hima?
mean, you mean specifically the abolition of the Himma or generally all of these actually reforms?
I was curious about the Hima, but if you have also others, that would be lovely. If you can
Well,
squeeze again a little bit. I know I'm asking a
sure,
big question, but
sure.
yeah.
The thing is that when it comes to the abolition of the Himma, so the problem is that Himma is only a thing in Arabia. And in Arabia, we don't have documentary evidence. And so far as literary sources are concerned, because the focus of literary sources actually shifts away from the Hijaz and from Arabia towards Iraq and Syria and Egypt, actually, after the conquests, we don't have as much evidence. And so far as I can tell, off the top of my head, we don't have actually. I mean, I don't know if there was any backlash or like support, backlash against or support for the abolition of the Hima in Arabia and the Hijaz, but of course the practice actually, I mean, the reform failed, and these Himas were not abolished. And insofar as the other actually measures are concerned, uh, I mean, they also failed because, for example, the issuing of land grants, for example, he says it's a bad thing, it needs to be abolished. It's actually even in classical Islamic law. It makes it not only continues actually to be these land grants continue to be issued, it even makes it to classical Islamic law. And we have lots of documents, lots of, for example, papyri that evidence actually the issuing of these grants. I just finished editing one of them a couple of days ago, actually. It's a document issuing a land grant to an individual. So this is very, I mean, this remains in practice. The and then Umar II actually allows, because as part of like this was the most important part actually, his reforms allow for people who have converted to Islam to make the hijrah and basically become members of the conqueror class. And this opens the floodgates, of course. So anyone who has converted to Islam can now join the conqueror class, stop paying taxes, and get something from the government. But this is, of course, not feasible. So what does like I mean what happens here is that like I mean it's like lots of people try to benefit from this actually this reform, and because it's not feasible, his immediate successors actually try to completely reverse the reforms. So there is some evidence that his successor Yazid II actually tries to completely reverse the reforms, meaning that even deport any and all people who have actually managed to move to garrison towns, become part of the conqueror class thanks to these reforms. And there's a rebellion in North Africa. The governor is killed, and when the governor is killed, Yazid II says, "Okay, anyone who's moved here can stay here, but from now on will be back to the old system." So the basically in grip, I mean, by and large, almost all of his reforms are actually reversed.
Very interesting. We might have time for one quick question if anybody wants to jump in. If not, I'll have another short one. You mentioned at the beginning about Umar II and his policies, that there are contradictory and conflicting sources in use in scholarship. Is that truly contradictory or conflicting, or is it just the fact that they attend to different sides of the same thing in a way?
Both actually. Why truly contradictory? Because we have other, I mean, because Umar II has become the saintly figure in Islam. You have like I mean other activities, other policies attributed to him, and even primary literature, like such as saying that well he was following classical Islamic law, and because in classical Islamic law converts are exempted from paying taxes, so taxes are only for non-Muslims, and when you convert to Islam you have to be exempted from payment of taxes and so on and so forth. He did that. He was a good guy, he was a saintly figure, he was a good Muslim, he did that. And that is, of course, I mean, I'm trying to use the edict and the Risāla fil-fayʼ as the authentic because I mean, this is a system that, as I argued, was only in place until the end of the Umayyad period. The Abbasids actually changed the system, so this would only make sense an edict like that under the Umayyad. We have now authenticated these two documents, and these are his basically like I mean, this is his basically package of reforms. So this is what you have, and you don't have anything about exemption from taxes in these two documents. But you have this elsewhere in the sources. And I think because of these two edicts, I think anything that says something contradictory that's not in these edicts as basically unreliable and basically a forgery.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And on this note, I'd like to thank everyone who joined today, and especially our speaker. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.